Good morning, church. If you can, go ahead and find your seats, and we'll get started in a few minutes.
Okay, this was mine. This was.
And it looks like my slides went away again, too. They're okay? All right. It's the luck of the Irish.
All that head stuff that.
And I do have a little clerical error, which is my fault. When we get to it in the slides, it'll say, now, in your packet are the verses of the next slides. Well, I didn't put them in the packet. So I'm going to have you open your Bibles to those verses when we get there, and or turn on your phone and get the verses when I get there. Well, thank you all for being here today. I recall, oh yeah, we have some more handouts. If you didn't get any handouts, we're going to hand some more out. And if we run out, we'll make some more too. The originals are back there in the media booth, guys, if we need some more. Minus the verses. So, I remember about a year and a half ago, when that question was posed to us, to the elders and the ministers of, can a woman pray in the presence of a man in a home Bible study or house-to-house group? And so we spent a year and a half going through all the verses that we can and researching and looking at the Greek and things in the Old Testament, stuff like that. So all these lessons are kind of a culmination of that to answer that question. So today's class is roles, women's roles in the church, and we're going to look at some word definitions from the Greek. So in this part, we're going to study those definitions. And over the decades, we know that many English words have changed their meanings. Examples are gay, which used to mean happy, and queer, which used to mean strange. The English language also has words that are homonyms, which are words which have the same spelling and pronunciation, but have different meanings. Some examples are crane. That bird is a crane. They had to use a crane to lift that object. She had to crane her neck to see the movie. Another word is date. Her favorite fruit to eat is date. Joe took Alexandria out on a date. So language, even the Greek of the New Testament times, has to be studied carefully to be sure that we get the meaning for that time and place. So here are some word definitions that we'll have to understand in the original Greek meaning, so we can see what the Apostle Paul was saying to the first century church. So andros, which is men or husbands, and then June, not goon, June, which is women or wives, and sigao, which has three different meanings: to be silent, to be quiet, or to hold one's peace. And that last definition you'll see in a lot of the things that were going on in the church in Corinth and in the church in Ephesus that Paul wrote Timothy about. So we're going to look at those. So when my wife and I became Christians about 27 years ago, we were not Buicks, brought up in church kids. So about 27 years ago, we have been taught at every Church of Christ that we've been to that we pattern ourselves after the first century church. So with that in mind, I would like to take a look at some of the words that described what worship services were like back then. Now, when we study the Bible, we need to look at the context of the passages and the meaning of that specific word or a specific word. Now, another thing too is probably productive that we define context and pretext. Context is the parts of a discourse that surround a word or passage and can throw light on its meaning, which is different from pretext, which is a purpose or motive alleged or an appearance assumed in order to cloak the real intention. Is context just one verse, or could it include the entire book? When I study the Bible subject, I ask the questions, who, what, where, when, and why. Who wrote it, and who was it written to?
Okay. Well,
When was it written?
here right now,
Where the letter was sent, and most importantly, why it was sent. That's what you have to look at. Because as you know, in the past, other types of denominations have taken passages out of context. So we need to look at that. So Paul wrote to the Corinthian church and told them that many things that they were doing improper, human relationships, going to court, marriage or not marriage, the work of the Holy Spirit, giving, worship, etc. So their formal worship service was not done properly. And you see it right there. But all things must be done properly and in an orderly manner. I'm sure you guys have heard those words before. So it was chaos during their worship service. It was not done decently and in order.
having more heads put together.
So back in the first century,
I mean, to find somebody to be.
they didn't worship in big buildings like we do today, where we have 250, 300 people. So I have a slide of what, I'm sorry. In fact, they met in homes. Okay, I skipped over that. Sorry about that. So Romans 16:5, greet my dear friend Epaenetus. I think I said that right. It's kind of hard to speak. Say those words. Who was the first convert to Christ in the province of Asia. Greet also the church that meets in their house. In Philemon 1 and 2, also Apphia, our sister, and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and the church that meets in your home. Okay? So just like we have house-to-house groups that we meet in houses, and that's what church was like in the first century. So what did a house look like in the first century? Here's kind of a Bible homes in Jesus' day. As you can see, some of the things that were there, that construction nails, they had looms, they had a roof roller for when they had daub and flat mud roof. They had a cistern where it's not what you think it is. It's where you get water out of. It's not where you go to the bathroom at. Okay, they had a cistern, had indoor animal stables. They had some private sleeping areas up on the top there. Open air preparation courtyard. There was ovens. There was all kinds of things that they used. So this is what a house looked like in Jesus' time in the first century. Now, there's another one that's kind of a cartoon, but that is what the original ruins of the church of houses in Corinth. So that's who Paul is writing to. So that's what the old original, and then they add some cartoons to it. Jesus said, I build planets, houses, temple, church. Home of the never look back plow. My yoke is lighter. So they had yokes. So there's kind of a flair to what the person that took that picture and posted on the internet of what a house in Corinth looked like. And I'll work back and forth because I can't do the red light in both scenes. So that's what we're talking about. But that's what a house in Corinth looked like in the first century. So that's where the Church of Christ in Corinth was meeting, in houses like that. Now, one thing that I want to show you here is this one here. I know it's kind of small print, but I tried to get it on one page. The entire passage from 1 Corinthians chapters 10, 14 through the end of chapter 14 is about public corporate worship, except for an aside in 10, 24 through 33, where Paul is discussing the bread and the cup in 24, and then goes off on a tangent and discusses eating meat sacrifices to idols, because that's what was going on in the first century. So, and this is an important point to remember for context. This is why Paul was writing to the church in Corinth. Then in chapter 11, he's talking about the Lord's Supper. In 12, the body and spiritual gifts and how they should be used in the assembly. And in chapter 13, the basis of our relationships, love. And in 14, back to spiritual gifts in the assembly. But it begins in chapter 10 with the cup of blessing and bread, which we break, sharing in the body of Christ, which we did today. So let's take a look at the first scriptures here. Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians 11, and we're going to go 4 through 16. And it's talking about men covering their heads while praying and prophesying, women praying and prophesying with their heads uncovered. So he starts on verse 4 here. Every man who prays and prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every woman who prays and prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same thing as having her head shaved. For if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. But if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, then she should cover her head. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image of and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For a man did not come from woman, but a woman from man, Adam and Eve. Neither was man created for the woman, but woman for man. It is for this reason that a woman ought to have authority over her own head because of the angels. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. They're not two separate. And here they're talking about husbands and wives. Remember the Andras and June, okay? Now, okay. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman. But everything comes from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not the very nature of things teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a disgrace to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For long hair is given to her as a covering. If anyone wants to be contentious about this, we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God. Now, some say in chapter 14, 4 through 6, which I think I can back that up. Yeah. Some say that in chapter 4 through 6 is talking about private prayer. But if we hold that into view, then what do we do with 10:16, which is obviously about the Lord's Supper, and 11:17, which is about the Lord's Supper or corporate worship? The context of the entire section is about public worship, not private worship. And how could one prophesy privately? It has to be in public. Okay, so let's look at the verses. Let's look at the verses where they were accused of getting drunk and letting others starve during the Lord's Supper. I got to go back to it. There you go. This is correcting the abuse of the Lord's Supper. It says, in the following directives, I have no praise for you, church in Corinth, for your meetings do more harm than good. In the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you, and to some extent, I believe it. No doubt there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. So then, when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper you eat, for when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and the other gets drunk. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you? Certainly not in this matter. So it's pretty obvious that the haves and the have-nots, the haves are having a good time and the have-nots were hurting. So Paul condemns them for dishonoring the Lord's Supper. Now, let's take another look at some more passages. I think I went too far. Yeah, there we go. In 1 Corinthians 10, 14 through 22, idol feasts and the Lord's Supper. This is where Paul goes off on a tangent and talks about idols. Therefore, my dear friends, flee from idolatry. I speak to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. Is not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks our participation in the blood of Christ? And is not the bread that we break a participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one loaf, we, who are many, are one body, for we all share the loaf. Consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? Do I mean then that food sacrificed to an idol is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. But the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God. And I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in the Lord's table and the table of demons. Are we trying to arouse the Lord's jealousy? Are we stronger than he? So he's asking these questions. And so let's take the first word that we have is that we talked about, that we mentioned, is the Greek word for silent, which is sigao, to be silent or to be quiet or to hold one's peace. So let's look at worship services in the Church of Christ in Corinth. So this is what's going on. So instructions for the church starts off 1 Corinthians 14:20. Brethren, do not be children in your thinking. Don't be childlike. Be smart. Be mature. Yet in evil, be infants. You don't know anything about evil things. You want to stay away from that, like a little infant baby doesn't know anything about that. But in your thinking, be mature. In the law, it is written, by men of strange tongues and by the lips of strangers, I will speak to this people. And even so, they will not listen to me, says the Lord. So, then the tongues are for a sign, not to those who believe, but to unbelievers. But prophecy is for a sign, not to unbelievers, but to those who believe. So prophecy is for the church. Speaking in tongues is for the unbelievers. Therefore, if the whole church assembles together and all speak in tongues, that's men and women in the first century church, they all speak in tongues, and ungifted men or unbelievers enter, will not they say that you are mad, you're crazy? But if all prophesy and an unbeliever or ungifted man enters, he is convicted by all. He is called to account by all. The secrets of his heart are disclosed, and so he will fall on his face and worship God. Worship God, declaring that God is certainly among you, the church in Corinth, the first century church. So, what is the outcome then, brethren, men and women, when you assemble? Each one has a psalm, has a teaching, has a revelation, has a tongue, has an interpretation. Let all things be done for edification. If anyone speaks in a tongue, it should be by 2 or at the most 3. Now, here's where he's going to start getting on them about how the worship assembly was just, crazy. It was a chaos. So he's going to start laying this out. This is what you should be doing. So if anyone speaks in a tongue, it should be by 2 or at the most 3, and each in turn, and one must interpret. But if there's no interpreter, he must keep silent. Hold your peace. in the church, and let him speak to himself and to God. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others pass judgment. But if a revelation is made to another who is seated, the first one must keep silent. Hold your peace. For you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and all may be exhorted. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to prophets. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. So everything was chaos. They were all confused of what's going on. The women are to keep silent. Sagao, hold one's peace in the churches. For they are not permitted, which the Greek word is epi, superimposition of time, place, and order, because everything was out of order in the first century church. That's why Paul's writing to them. Now, but are subject to themselves, which means to God or their husbands, just as the law also says. If they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is improper, which means not in accord with propriety, fear of offending, against conventional rules of behavior, modesty, good manners, or good taste, for a woman to speak in church. Hold your peace. So what was going on, men and women both, it was chaos. They were talking over each other. They were talking out of turn. There's a certain order that you're supposed to do things, and they weren't doing it. That'd be like, if Doug's up here preaching, I come up and say, that's not right. That's what we need to do this, and I'm going to talk about a different lesson. So we'd be chaotic here. We'd be out of order. Okay, one more. Was it from you, the woman, that the word of God first went forth? Or has it come to you only? If anyone thinks he is a prophet or spiritual, let him recognize that the things which I write to you are the Lord's commandment. But if anyone does not recognize this, he is not recognized. Therefore, my brethren, desire earnestly to prophesy, and do not forbid to speak in tongues. But all things must be done properly and in an orderly manner. So that's the instruction Paul was giving the church in Corinth, because it was just out of control, And he'd heard about this, and he was telling them that this is not right. You guys aren't doing this right. You're not conducting your worship services every Sunday morning. So now, the New Testament churches in the first century, women were prophetesses. They prayed, they spoke in tongues, and they interpreted tongues in the formal worship services. So let's take a look at what a prophet or prophetess does. Now, prophesy, there's 2 kinds of prophecy, There's 2 kinds of prophecy. There is forthtelling, preaching to make public, and then there's foretelling, which has to do with the future. Isaiah 53 is foretelling about the suffering of the coming Messiah, many others too. In the first 7 chapters of Amos are forthtelling and foretelling. He's doing both. And we're going to talk about Peter here too. That's coming up. He reminds them of their sins and tells them that they will be carried out on fish hooks. Thus saith the Lord. That's about the future. So, Acts 2, where Peter, and I'm just gonna kind of skim through this because we don't have a lot of time left. So, Peter starts, and you've got this Acts 2. You guys have read this so many times, so you know what it is. So, and it shall be in the last days, God says, that I'll pour forth my spirit on all mankind, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. And he talks about men's and visions and dreams. Even on my bond slaves, both men and women, I will in those days pour forth my spirit, and they shall prophesy. Then he talks about the men of Israel and about the church, and I'm sorry, about how they crucified Christ, nailed him to the cross, and then he quotes some scriptures in the past. You know, I saw the Lord always in my presence. He talks about that more, and then 29, brethren, may I confidently say to you regarding the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us today. He talks about that. So let's go down here. Didn't abandon Jesus in Hades. He had the power over death, and he's exalted to the right hand of God. Sit at my right hand until make your enemies your footstool. Then he starts 36. Therefore, because of all that history, let all the house of Israel know for certain that God has made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. And then, let's see, I think I got that one. Yeah, that's that one. Okay. So, back that up a little bit. So he's preaching. He's talking to the church, and it escapes me right now, but where was Peter preaching? Was it, what city was he in? Jerusalem. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, okay, so let's take a look at the definition of prophecy. And I think that, did I go past that? Sorry about that. Did that? We talked about that, Acts 2. Okay, I'm sorry. It's Agabus. I lost my place, sorry. So, in Acts 11:27, it says, during this time, some prophets came down to Jerusalem, to Antioch. One of them named Agabus, and the prophet is prophetio, which means to foretell events divine, speaking under inspiration. And he stood up, he stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world. This happening during the reign of Claudius. The disciples, as each one was able, decided to provide help for the brothers and sisters living in Judea. This they did, sending their gift to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. And the next one is Acts 21. After we had been there a number of days, a prophet named Agabus, prophetio, foretelling events divine, speaking under divine inspiration, came down from Judea. Coming over to us, he took Paul's belt, tied his own hands and feet with it, and said, the Holy Spirit says, in this way, the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem will bind the owner of this belt. That's Paul's belt. And we'll hand him over to the Gentiles. And you know, a lot of history in the New Testament of Paul being in prison a lot, wrote a lot of letters from prison. So that's to tell the future. Okay. Now, the slide of the prophecy definition. Prophecy, Greek word is prophetio, foretell events, divine, speak under inspiration. Prophet, Greek word is prophetes, foretelling the future, or inspired speaker, poet. And prophetess, Greek word is prophetess, female foreteller, the future. So she is speaking about the future. So now this the next one. It says, now in your packet are the verses of the next slide. And I did not put them in there. So if you could open your Bibles or turn on your Bibles, if you would go to, let's see here. If you go to Acts 15 and verses 30 through 32. And I've got my Bible turned on, so I'll do that today too. So if you look at this, I have a chart coming up. Oops. Here's the chart. Here's Acts 15, 30 to 32, and 1 Corinthians 14, and some different verses. So if you look at that in the context of what was going on, so in verse 30, through 33, the congregation is gathered. So when they were sent away, they went down to Antioch, and having gathered their congregation together. Okay. So they encouraged or exhorted one another, verse 32, and they strengthened, verse 32. And the length is many words. Kind of like Doug's sermon. No, I'm sorry, Doug, you here? And then in 1 Corinthians 14 through 15, if you want to turn over that so you can look at some words. 1 Corinthians 14 and the first 5 verses. In verses 3 through 5, and in verse 28, the church. So he's talking to the church. Verse 3, edification. Verse 3 and 31 are exhortation. Verse 3 is comfort. Verse 4 is edify. Verse 19 is teach, or instruct, And verse 31 is teach. Verse 30 is revelation. And the control, hold one's peace, in verse 28. To be sigao, hold one's peace, be silent. I wanted to go over that a little bit longer, but we only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to go through so I won't hold you guys up, and you'll still be able to beat the Baptists for lunch. So, in other words, a prophet is someone who speaks for an extended period of time in the context of the gathered body of believers, proclaiming words that encourage, strengthen, comfort, edify, and teach. This description sounds a lot like what most people would call today preaching and teaching. So, now let's take a look at some problems in the church in Ephesus. Paul's writing to Timothy, and he's heard about all the things that are going on in Ephesus, and you'll be surprised to see what some of the word definitions that was going on there. So, Acts 19, 23 through 35, it's New American Standard. About that time, there occurred no small disturbance concerning the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, was bringing no little business to the craftsmen that were there. These he gathered together with the workmen of similar trades and said, "Men, you know that our prosperity depends upon this business. You see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but almost all of Asia, this Paul guy has persuaded and turned away a considerable number of people, saying that gods made with hands are no gods of all." So that's stirring them up. So not only is there danger in this trade of ours, fallen into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis be regarded as worthless, and that she whom all of Asia and the world worship even be dethroned from her magnificence. When they heard this, they were filled with rage. They began crying out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." The city was filled with confusion, and they rushed with one accord into the theater, dragging along Gaius and Paul's traveling companion from Macedonia. And when Paul wanted to go into the assembly, the disciples wouldn't let him. And some of the Asiarchs, probably Asia, so Asiarchs, who were friends of his, sent him and repeatedly urged him not to venture into the theater. So then some were shouting one thing and some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and the majority didn't know for what reason they'd come together. Some of the crowd concluded it was Alexander, since the Jews had put him forward, and having motioned with his hand, Alexander intended to make a defense to the assembly. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, a single outcry arose from them, and they all shouted for 2 hours. They shouted, would you like to shout for 2 hours? You wouldn't have any voice left if you did that. Shouted for 2 hours. "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." After quieting the crowd down, the town clerk said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there, after all, who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is guardian of the temple of the great Artemis, and of the image which fell down from heaven?" So, that's what was going on in Ephesus. And so now Paul is writing to Timothy. About that. So, 5 to 10 years later, Paul is writing to Timothy as he is in prison in Rome, and he is now absent and is concerned with the problem of false teachers in Ephesus and the dissensions, controversies, and moral problems that they are causing. Paul's desire is that all Christians be able to live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. So, he writes to Timothy, and it's instruction for worship. I urge then, first of all, that petitions and prayers and intercession and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all of those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. Now, back it up. He starts off by saying, therefore, I want the men in every place to pray, lifting holy hands, and remember these two words, without wrath and dissension. We're going to look at what that means. Women instructed. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modesty, and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold pearls or costly garments, but rather by the means of good works, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness. A woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness. Now, that's what he wants them to do. Now, let's take a look at what the men were doing. This is in the church in, the church in Ephesus, sorry. So, wrath. Now, this is a Greek word. Its origination is org. Violent passion, abhorrence, anger, indignation, vengeance, and dissension. The Greek word is kachos. The act of insurrection, uproar, and riot. That's what the men of the church were doing in Ephesus. Now, you remember the background of the church in Ephesus, people were converted, and most everybody in Asia was worshiping the goddess Artemis, okay? So that's what they were doing. So he instructs the men, first, when you pray, lift holy hands, but don't have all this in your life. Don't do this in the church. He was condemning them for doing that. He said, this is what I want you to do. Anthropos, used in verse 12, men or husbands, or June, women or wives. But I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet, hold one's peace. For it was Adam who was first created, and then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman, being deceived, fell into transgression. But women are preserved through the bearing of children if they continue in the faith and love and sanctity with self-restraint. Okay? So now we're going to see what the women were doing. So this is what, before he talked about what the men were doing. So, sigao, to be silent or be quiet or to hold one's peace. Now, in verse 12 it says, I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. The word which is translated exercise authority is a very strong word, authentio, and lost noun hentes, used only here in the New Testament. and its definition is, which means to dominate, to take position of power by force. In earlier usage of the word, it's signifying one who, with his own hands, killed either others or himself. Later, it came to denote one who acts on his own authority. That's in Vines. So, what were the women doing? I mean, they were trying to take over. They were trying to take over the church there in Ephesus, and by force, to dominate the men that were in the church, or the husbands, wives. They were trying to dominate what they were teaching and preaching. And this church in Ephesus, I mean, Paul knew about all these things that were going on, and so that's why he was writing to Timothy to tell the church this. This is the problem they had. Different from Corinthians, their worship was just all messed up. But this was bad. I mean, this was all those definitions of the words. Let me see if I can back it up. Did we lose something, guys? Can you back it up? Okay. I have to go through all of them. I'll keep going. There we go. Gotta go all the way through it. Okay, here we go. And I'm running out of time. Violent passion, abhorrence, anger, indignation, vengeance. The act of insurrection, uproar, and riot. So that was what was going on in the church in Ephesus. And with all that going on, the women were trying to take over. They were going to dominate that worship service and tell their own things. They were arguing back and forth. They were going back and forth. It was chaos too, not like the church in Corinth, but that's what it was about. So I think that's all I have. I just want to make sure. The reason why Paul focuses on women in this passage is simply that in Ephesus, that was a problem he faced. A group of women were trying to gain control and to dominate others. Remember the influence of the false teachers that were there, saying great things about the goddess of Artemis. So this is the context of that passage. So we're out of time. And of course, if you have any clarification questions or any type of questions at all, just email me and I'll answer them, and we'll go through all that. So thank you for being here today, and God bless.